You see, something's going to happen.
What? What's going to happen?
Something wonderful.
What?
I understand how you feel. You see, it's all very clear to me now.
Welcome to the Occult Rejects. I was going to make my boy Headless do it tonight. Actually, you know what? I'm going to make Headless do it anyway. Introduce the topic, my man, please.
You got it, brother.
I screwed you up with the intro.
Slayer,
yeah.
And I was getting lost in the Slayer. So tonight we are talking American Blue Bloods. I think this is an important topic because far too often we focus on the European Blue Bloods. We talk about these European elites, but we've got them right here in our backyard that have been elites since the time of the Revolutionary War onward. A lot of the mechanism for how they became elites is not really well understood. A lot of their compounds and their massive mansions haven't really been that explored. As we're focused over in Europe, we're being dominated by these elite families in the United States, and it's time we start to educate ourselves about the American Blue Bloods. They're not always playing for our team, and they're not always playing for their team. So it's important to understand who these characters are, where they come from, and how they think. And tonight we're going to be getting into a little bit of reincarnation talking about how that influences these family structures. And we've got Nick from the Occult Rejects, obviously, and we've got JJ Vance with Operation GCD. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, tell them where they can find you.
You can go, JJ.
Nick, by all means, go ahead.
Oh, all right. Well, I'm Nick. I'm Nick from the Occult Rejects. Stuff's available on BitChute, Rumble, YouTube, and all major podcasts. And the occultresearchinstitute.org. Thank you. Go ahead, JJ.
Oh, nice. JJ. Howdy, folks. Double J here. JJ Vance, host of Operation GCD podcasts. Shenanigan-infused journey into the mind of this particular garbage can dude. Appreciate the invite, gentlemen. There's definitely this is an interesting topic in many regards, especially when considering some of it's always these people of influence that seem to do these wild ass shit in this country, from Patty Hearst of some blue blood families of the Hearst family to what I like to call a few years ago when millionaires attack, when that Stephen Paddock fella decided he's just going to start popping off on people. Maybe he's not from an elite family, but he's of an elite status in society, being a multimillionaire and owning numerous, planes and homes and businesses. It's all spooky shit, but nonetheless, on paper, he was at least a multimillionaire. Then there was a kid in Parkland, Florida, who was a multimillionaire at the age of 18, who allegedly shot up his high school. His father was a business partner of Wilt Chamberlain's sports agent. Wilt Chamberlain, prior to Michael Jordan, was the highest paid NBA player. So dude had some money. His father died and left him some money in a trust that he got when he was 18. It used to be available through Florida court documents. I believe it has all since been sealed, or maybe at least was partially sealed. You could still at least see the sealed case, and they've even removed that at this time, I believe. Nonetheless, then millionaires attack, and then there's this new fella who and why do millionaires attack? It's not, what I mean? Like, these people have kids 18 years old, he's got millions of dollars, and he's just gonna go shoot some folks at a high school. I mean, there's other problems to that story, that narrative altogether, but just on that fact alone of this elite kind of people impacting society. And this new fellow, apparently, the fellow that murked the CEO of United Health in Manhattan, who allegedly was some sort of mastermind, by also some sort of stupid idiot, and was identified by his bushy eyebrows, like Ryan Koberger was incriminated by his bushy eyebrows in the Idaho 4 case. Nonetheless, this character is a UPenn grad, bachelor's and master's in computer science. He's a valedictorian of his high school, so he's apparently from a wealthy family of Maryland who's in politics. He's got a first cousin in the state house of Maryland. So, it's another character of a very elite status, right? Not everyone gets to go to University of Penn, especially get computer science degrees. And, he's intelligent enough to do these things. That's what I'm saying. So, he,
right.
Again, elite folks impacting society. I don't know that he's necessarily a quote unquote blue blood, being of Italian heritage, so he wouldn't likely fall in that category because the Italian colonization of America did not happen until much later than these blue blood families were here.
But still important to note that the blue bloods like to use up and coming families. They like to get in on the ground floor so that they can basically control and puppet whatever up and coming new money is now springing up around them. And that new money, that new influence is something that they're looking out for, but it's not something the American people are too involved in trying to seek out. For the most part, it seems that biographical information is what we take from the person in their own way that they present it. But there's so much more to it other than that. And looking into their family background starts to bring a little bit of that out. For example, if we can go back to the DuPont family. And
sure.
The DuPont family.
They're pretty notorious for some shit in recent decades, right? Diddling their kids in Delaware, murdering folks in driveways in Pennsylvania, and skirting charges in both circumstances. You know, especially relative to what other folks would do. They, you know, if you murder someone in your driveway and you barricade yourself in your house, the cops are burning that motherfucker down by midnight. You know what I mean? They're not giving you that much time. They let that DuPont dude go for 2 weeks. They cut off his power. They turned his power back on for him because they felt bad. Like we're sorry, DuPont, man. You murdered some dude in your driveway. We'll turn your power back on, and it'd be a nice hot situation for you. Like, yeah, they get preferential treatment for sure.
Right. So the elite game that they're playing is a very, very risky one. Because when you start to remove the normal accountability that most of us have within society, where we have neighbors watching us, we have, officers watching us, once they achieve a certain level of power and influence, all of those accountability factors start to go away. And then what we see this dominance start to turn to decadence. And from that decadence, we start to see that the concept of elitism itself has now fallen off, right? I mean, if you were to compare the elites of ancient Greece, where they're on the battlefield, they're fighting with spears, like the elites of today couldn't hold a candle to the elites back then. But we've had such an inflationary level of
I think in either society, let me interject real quick. I think in either society, the ancient Greek example or now, there is a relative example in both cultures. But I think these elite families, they definitely get dumb and degraded, dumb and more, they get more dumb like, if you will. I'm acting real dumb like because I can't think of the word right now that I was trying to think of. Dumb and degenerate. There we go. Each subsequent generation of these families seems to get dumber and more degenerate, right? Because they're cut off from any accountabilities.
It seems like the 3Ds go right in a row. You've got dominance, you've got decadence, and then you've got degeneracy. And it's just
degeneracy is always in there. Yeah.
And you could even put that in terms of generations, right? The first generation has the dominance. The second generation has the decadence. Third generation has the degeneracy. And it seems like a
good description.
Right. Once you've removed the competition from the elites, they lose their ability to thrive under that pressure.
Sure.
And so a lot of these American blue bloods have developed systems to where they can maintain that sort of fighting edge. And this is where a lot of the cruelty within the families themselves come from, and a lot of the mind control and satanic pedophilia as well. They want well-honed weapons so that they can maintain their dominance. And in a lot of cases, having that child abuse inflicted on these blue blood children as they come up keeps them focused on whatever they're being programmed with. And you can see a lot of these examples, like the book Programmed to Kill. You see all these murderers, these well-known serial killers being connected to these American blue blood families. And that's not a coincidence.
Well, I mean,
are there any...
Hinckley skirted all accountability, right?
Right.
I mean, you can go buy his art on eBay right now, or you can even email him. He's got his email posted on the top of his Twixter account. I follow him on Twixter. I think it's hilarious. Because he really was like, he really didn't really serve any time. I mean, he was in like a mental hospital in DC for a while, but they started letting him out allegedly on weekends. But I saw him years before he was officially let out, and it was more than just weekends apparently, according to the locals there in Williamsburg, which is where he lives today, is Williamsburg, Virginia.
Right. And so Hinckley, for example, is
he's OG blue blood, right? He's Massachusetts Bay. The second governor, I think, was a Hinckley of Massachusetts Bay Colony. Same descent, the same ancestor that Barry Soetoro, aka Barack Obama, and the Bushes have.
And there you go. The Bush family was very influential in getting Hinckley to do what he did. Even Hinckley admitted to that much. So you've got George Bush Sr. at their house having dinner with them. What, the night before or the week before he goes out and tries to kill President Reagan?
I think it was Hinckley's older brother and Neil Bush, the eldest Bush of the George Bush #1 sons. He was the one. They were doing that oil business, but George Bush one and Hinckley's dad had done oil business before already in Texas, and they're also like second cousins or something like that, or third cousins. So
right, keeping it in the family is something that they love.
Oh, for sure, definitely keeping it in the family. Yeah, because the Bushes, as much as they want to claim to be Texans, they're from Connecticut. I mean, Massachusetts and Connecticut, that is their roots. They are a blue blood family.
Right. Very, very deep back into history. And they're very, very astute social climbers. And the social climbing angle of this is very important, because if you don't understand the hierarchy and the pecking order of these different families, there's very little chance that you can actually make it to the top of these different industries that they end up monopolizing. And an interesting
one more example on the
that,
Bushes, what you're talking about as far as manipulating and monopolizing. Did you realize they made a Mexican Bush? And they've had him down in Texas as the land commissioner. He's from Florida. It's Jeb's son. You know what I mean? And they've had him, George P. Bush is his name. They've had him down in Texas as the Texas land commissioner, which is a pretty powerful position, controlling the land, especially in such a large state as Texas, when you're talking about a lot of mineral-rich land at that rate, right? So, right. Oil-rich and whatever else they got, propane, whatever else they're drilling out of the ground. Nonetheless, that's exactly what you're describing, though. The manipulation and monopolizing. This dude's from Florida. They followed him through as I think like a Pete Buttigieg style U.S. Navy officer, right? One of his first acts of business, for some reason, as the Texas Land Commissioner, was to go to Israel and meet with Netanyahu, which is a strange act. But it speaks to the manipulation and the monopolizing of these political activities. He's clearly in that network, getting groomed for much larger office. There's no other reason the Texas Land Commissioner would be going to Israel to meet with, their prime minister, right?
Right. And there's been several confrontations between the people and this sort of American blue blood type of political machine. And I think the one that stands out most to me is the idea of Tammany Hall. Right. So the Tammany Hall machine in New York City was supposedly attacked by Teddy Roosevelt, another American blue blood, who seemed to reform it in such a way to make it kind of less obvious, the political graft and the political favors that were being handed out at the city hall level. But didn't
Tammany Hall grow out of George Clinton? Not George Clinton, that was the Parliament Funkadelic, but George Clinton, the former governor of New York, member of the
governor,
Society
senator,
Colonel
senator.
Chapter of, well, he was a very powerful man. He ran the first third party politics in America, the Anti-Masonic Party, despite being a Freemason, despite being a member of the Society of Cincinnati. You know what I mean? He was telling everybody, no, I'm not with him at all. We'll run in the anti-Freemason party here. But he was, I believe, he was one of the guys that started Tammany Hall, if I'm not mistaken.
If people look at the example of Governor Senator George Clinton as the way that you can maintain power through confusion, right? Because not only did he probably order the murder of this guy, this captain, what's his name again?
William Morgan.
Captain Morgan.
Another member of the Society of Cincinnati.
right? Not only did he organize that murder, but he also put up a reward to try and find the killers. Right? So he was going to pay $5,000 to find the killers when he knew full well that it was him because he probably ordered it. So the whole game was completely controlled. And unfortunately, people don't go back to the example of America's first party, the anti-Masonic party, and start to learn from those examples and see how they could be used to this very day.
Yeah, how that was manipulated, because it was deeply manipulated.
Right. Like you can look at ISIS, for example, right? If you've been paying attention, you can see ISIS now, taking over Syria, right? Which has happened in the last couple of weeks. But, this ISIS force gets medical aid and weapons from Israel. So what actually is going on here? Are they really enemies? Are they friends? And as soon as they take over Damascus, they come out and say, no, we're going to actually free you, Palestine. But a week before that, they said, we want to be friends with Israel. So do you listen to what they say or do you listen to what they do? And I think that's where we need to go as a society, is start listening to what they do. And the way that you can see what they're probably going to do is by looking at those family connections and understanding their connection to these industries and how they try to monopolize them, how they try to integrate themselves into society using the social climbing aspect of, their influence.
I actually find ISIS to be very interesting. I'd like to cover them one day.
They're back. ISIS is back.
They pop up in ISIS, ISIS-K, and like you're saying, I've watched them kind of contradict themselves in certain things that they've done.
They're over there in Syria on a reunion tour right now. ISIS, they're getting back together with Al-Qaeda. They're going to have a nice winter festival.
They thought that we would all just forget that this was ISIS now that they've changed their name again and rebranded as HST or something like that. It's like
whatever they're calling
it. It's the same people. Right?
Exactly. It's stupid.
And so I think we were close to a real 9/11 truth movement before Trump got in there and finally, said, all right, we're done with the ISIS. But it's like at the same time, you've been funding them, like the United States has been funding them this whole time. And now they're back doing the political will of their neighbor over in Israel, creating a greater Israel. So
it's funny, they never attack Israel, do they?
No.
Israel's right there. They seem like they'd be a convenient target. You know what I mean?
Right. But it seems like whatever intelligence service is in charge of them, it's very much the political will of Israel. Because as soon as ISIS took over, Israel started bombing all of these factories over in Damascus. It's like they just got rid of the troops so that Israel could go in and flatten the place and solidify their what they call buffer zones. So you're going to hear the term buffer zones being used up again and again and again by Israel. What they're doing is a land grab. And instead of saying land grab, they found that buffer zones is a much more corporate way of putting their invasion of Syria, Lebanon, Iran soon, all these different things are just going to be corporate talk. But it seems like the horse trade has been made. They get Syria. Russia stops having to deal with Ukraine. That seems to be the horse trade that has been made. And now all of the Christians in Syria are going to be beheaded by this new ISIS group that is the old ISIS group. So I wouldn't want to be a Christian anywhere American foreign policy is now being enacted, because it always seems like they get the brunt of whatever any of these extremists want to do and whatever America wants to do to them. For example, in Hiroshima, that was the only Christian enclave in all of Japan. And we nuked them. You never want to be a Christian on the other side of American foreign policy, because they know, well, we can just take you out and nobody will believe it because, we're a Christian nation.
Sure. But so those are good points, but you caused me to remember a couple of things relative to Tammany Hall, the blue blood activities and the manipulation of American politics. So Tammany Hall was not just as you referenced the City Hall aspects where it grew out of. They were localized in New York City, but it had its admirations on political office, federally speaking, president's office.
Can I explain what the idea of Tammany Hall is?
Sure, yeah, please do. That's good because I could. You probably do it better than I could. Go ahead, please do.
Originally, the idea was if you get elected, then your guys, anybody who owes you a favor or anybody who, you owe a favor to, will take the positions within that political machine. So with Tammany Hall, as soon as you would elect a mayor, he would just inject all of his family, all of his friends, all of the big business interests right into positions of power right away. And so everybody knew that that was nakedly corrupt. So what Teddy Roosevelt wanted to do was to have permanent positions of power and give an expert class the ability to manipulate these organs of power from within the state. So what he tried to do is stop the naked political graft and start handing over the reins to all of the experts. So before these Tammany Hall reforms, who you would elect would actually change things. After the Tammany Hall reforms, who you elected really didn't matter anymore because the organs of the state had all the power.
Right, or create a bureaucrat. It was basically the early onset of lobbyists and bureaucrats, basically. Right. But yeah, so and that was a good explanation. So that they grew that from the New York City stage to a federal stage through folks like Martin Van Buren. Martin Van Buren came from the Tammany Hall crowd. In fact, his protege was Samuel Tilden. Tilden's father was a state senator in New York. Tilden was the guy who won the presidency and ended the federal occupation of the South in the Great Compromise of 1877. He won the 76 election, but forewent the office of the president to remove all the troops from the South. So Tammany Hall became a very powerful political unit for years to come, and it was compromised solely of blue blood folks. Van Buren, he's a Dutch fellow, not of the status of the American blue blood status, but his wife was. So he married into it. Much like Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton moved into the Dutch family, or married into the Dutch families of New York. The two of the founding Dutch families, the Van Schulers and the I think the Van Cortlands, actually. I think it was the Schulers and the Cortlands.
Right. And it's important to note the different regions of the country had, these different power blocks that came from Europe. And obviously
came from the original colonies, they came like the New York to this day. I mean, these families still run New York, the Roosevelts, the Rockefellers. These are all Dutch families, the Schulers, the Van Schulers, the Van Cortlands. These are all the original Dutch families that founded, New Amsterdam and,
right.
new what they call it, New Dutchland. I don't know. They don't speak English very well, so I don't know what they call it, but
this is where we get the concept of the WASPs, White Anglo-Saxon Protestant, right?
Yep.
So the WASPs were the Van Cortlands, so it was all of these, blue bloods from the Netherlands coming over and having this exchange back and forth between Europe and America through places.
But each colony was like that. So you had that's the New York contingent. Then you have the WASPs contingent of like Massachusetts, the Welds, for example.
Right.
One of the early families, the Hanckleys we already mentioned.
Right. But in these different areas, you have these families that put down roots and put down monopolies, and they just start from where they left off in Europe, pretty much. And so what you find is that these people don't have a lot of time or patience for things like democracy, right? They never have. And I think it would be foolish to think you're ever going to vote your way out of this sort of American blue blood system. What you have to do is understand how it works and understand the players involved and understand the leverage you have. Because if you think you're voting your way out of the system, you ain't going to do it. It's not the system you think it is, and it never has been. Democracy is sort of this marketing strategy, right? And the marketing strategy has now become a religious experience. So this is why they say we must save our democracy. They're not including you in the statement of our, right? They're talking about them and everybody behind them. They're not talking about people in front of the stage. Our goes that way, not that way. If you can remember that, that's one of the oldest tricks of a politician is they're always saying we and our, and they're always doing the plural, but it doesn't include you. It doesn't include you. And everybody tries to include themselves in it, but it ain't you. So when you understand that about democracy, you start to get the picture right. So establishing yourself as more than just a citizen, more than just a cog, actually making a power block, actually understanding your individual power and your collective power, is how you grow in a sense that is more in tune with reality. Because the idea of these blue blood families goes all the way back to the Stone Age, right? Probably before that as well.
Oh,
right?
For sure.
The very first people who identified themselves as elites knew that they had to establish a family as a way of protecting that power, you know? And so you have raiding parties that would grow into tribes, which would grow into states, the city-state model. And so once you kind of understand that, you can understand things like the Society of the Cincinnati better. Because
that's a good example. If I may interject there, Headless, that's a good example because it is a modern-day knighthood, and all these political entanglements you're describing, I think it's best related. This is the perspective I often use. I look at it through like a Middle Ages perspective. Like, look at it through medieval times, right? Like, it's the same families then, it's the same families now. So they're going to be operating in the same capacity as they were then as they are now. They're not doing any new shit, right? So the there may be new technologies applied or whatever through some of their tactics, but the core tactics are the same, and it's the same family. So I think it's the best to look at in that regard, to break it down. And the Society of Cincinnati is a great example because, again, they identify themselves as a knighthood, and these families, again, are very, folks may not realize it, but news media accounts almost every day involve these families. For example, just throwing out there that was worldwide was that submarine implosion. That dumb dickhead who took those folks down the bootleg submarine with the video game controller. That dude was the descendant of two founding fathers, and he was named after both of them. Rush. The one he was a direct descendant of, which I presume he was the member of his paternal heritage. He was descendant of Benjamin Rush, I believe, the first Surgeon General of Washington's army who tried to have a coup against Washington, but signer of the Declaration of Independence nonetheless, and member of the society. And so, these families, that dude was, he was very wealthy, so these families are very wealthy still today.
Right. And the idea of these ruling families, this aristocracy, comes from a very, very pre-Christian perspective. And what's interesting about that is the pre-Christian perspective is the one that has reincarnation included into it. And reincarnation isn't about, 40-year-old woman getting hypnotized into believing that she was Cleopatra. They believe
they're always slaves, right? Like they're always slaves, or Cleopatra, one of the two. I feel like there's a strong victimhood related to these past life situations.
Right.
Of course, if you're in Scientology, you're always some king or something in the past.
Right. But it has a lot to do with how you view yourself in this lifetime, is how you're going to remember things in previous lifetimes. Now, as I've talked about over and over again, is that they've proven over and over again in study after study that rats have what can be termed ancestral memory. So what they'll do is they will shock a rat while playing a tone or some sort of triggering mechanism to where the rat knows that the shock is coming after the tone, right? And then they'll make those rats sperm donors, and then their offspring will then act like they're about to be shocked after hearing the tone, even though they were never introduced to the stimulus response mechanism. There is a ancestral memory taking place on something like rats. Now, they can't. It's kind of like this video I saw on Twixter where this beaver was adopted from as a baby, so it never saw another beaver build a dam, but suddenly knew how to build a dam. Right? Is that what you're saying? It's something like that. Yeah, it's something like that that's going on.
Slightly less retarded, but something like that.
Right. It's going on a deeper level than just our conscious level. So when we view the world as being this independent thing that has nothing to do with our ancestry, what ends up happening is we end up becoming more controlled by those ancestral memories because we're not aware that they would even exist. So when you've got a religion like Christianity that sort of removes the concept of reincarnation, or these memories carrying on through the bloodline, and say, no, you're an independent soul. There was no before times, and there's only one after times, and you don't just keep coming back. You don't have these memories in the blood. If you've got that perspective, you become blissfully unaware that you're repeating the same cycles that your ancestors were going through again and again and again. And unfortunately, without that perspective, you become very easy to control. So we're fed these narratives, we're fed these ideas without having the perspective of a long view of history. And we end up acting like it. And we end up getting ourselves into situations like we're facing today, where we don't realize that our ancestral enemies are the ones ruling us, and they're the ones that have been ruling us for a long, long, long time. So we've got to get out of that sort of barnyard mentality by understanding that we are connected to our ancestors on a much deeper, subconscious, fundamental level. Once we get to that point, we can start to form our own tribes.
No, I mean, that's a good point, because most folks don't even realize the effect that a lot of these families have on society still to this day.
Right.
I'm not even talking like in the conspiratorial mindset, like I'm always putting Tuesday Weld on blast, for example, of the Weld family, Society Cincinnati family out of Massachusetts, whose home is built on top of a mound. They're in Brookline, I think they're just outside of Brookline, Jamaica Plains area. Still today, the home still sits there. It served as the society's headquarters during the war. That was the Massachusetts contention of the officers. They all used it as a headquarters. So very prominent, family in every aspect of the American Revolution, from the settlement of the pre-revolution time through the revolution. Again, some very mound-related activities, building on a mound. Their family's still very prominent today. Bill Weld, governor of Massachusetts for a time, ran for president of the Libertarian Party, 2016 as a VP to Gary Johnson. Tuesday Weld, actress, very prominent occult person in the occult scenes, apparently. Run a lot of the occult business through the years, as the legends go.
Satanic Bible, dedicated
Satanic
to her.
Bible. Yeah. Yeah. She kind of, there was a show in the 70s, like an evening, like a nighttime show. She when she was faced with some questions about that, because after LaVey made some comments in the 70s, she was facing some tabloids about his comments, and she wore a witch's hat on one of them shows, kind of mocking it. And I was like, well, that's just ridiculous. She's just being ridiculous now. She's clearly into occult activities, and it is clearly in her family, right? There are references to the Weld family being not her direct line. There's another Weld family that from a line that didn't come to America that's still over in the UK that's actually a prominent member in the occult. Like, he's written about in the occult, in like occult scenes and occult researcher, 150 years ago or something like that. So there's definitely evidence of the Weld family being involved in the occult. And that's what's alleged with her, that she was chosen to be this Illuminati style high priestess in Hollywood, as a young actress.
Right. And it's important to note that it was the women who were high priestesses at the Oracle at Delphi. So sure. I don't think that these families that have a much longer memory than you or I do, because they have this direct connection to these ruling families back from the Stone Age, actually think of the world the same way we do. So having the ability to prophesy, having the ability to carry out magic are something highly valued by these very pre-Christian cultures. They're not taken in by the marketing that we're sold as the way we ought to be living and the way that we ought to think about things. They're thinking about things in a much more ancient way than we do today. And sure. Having that perspective is important. So for the Greeks, reincarnation was in the blood. Like, you would come back to the same family after you've died, and you would take part in the same kind of heroism and the same kind of tactics that they wanted to engender into the population. So what they believed is, this was also a Northern European thing too. Anytime you had the European concept of reincarnation, fame played a big part with it. So the more famous the ancestor was, the more likely it is that a little bit of that memory, that ancestral memory, would reestablish itself in you being the distant relative or, close relative of that person with the fame. And what we see is with the Society of the Cincinnati, they wanted to keep all of the officer corps of the Revolutionary War together and moving in a certain direction to maintain that sort of power.
Sure. Yeah, all those families have intertwined since the start of America. I mean, I've discovered that going through my own genealogy and DNA tests to learn some of that history. I mean, from the families from the South, within the society intermarried with the families from the North. This is most relevant in the Society of Cincinnati headquarters. It's named the Anderson House after Robert Clow Anderson, I believe was his name. He's lieutenant colonel and one of the head surveyors underneath Washington. One of the head officers that trusted by Washington and his army out of Virginia. There, his descendant married Weld's descendant. So they were an intermarriage between the North and the South, contingents of the society. Basically, I kind of break down the society power structure as kind of Massachusetts and Virginia, and everyone else kind of falls in line between each side of that, more or less. New York seems to get a little wily from time to time. They seem to like to murder each other in coups. We referenced one already with Captain William Morgan and Clinton. They were both members of the society. But also they also happen to be Freemasons. Not all members of the society are Freemasons, from my understanding and assessment. But those two happen to be Freemasons. But then you also had Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr, two members of the New York chapter of the society that were dueling off in a murderous duel.
When it comes to these fraternal organizations and these secret societies, what I think is important is to remember it's a Venn diagram. So the more different groups that you're a part of, that means you have more influence over those different groups. So what you'll find is that a lot of these inner orders or outer orders, as they would be called within the Freemasons, have this huge Venn diagram of all these different tentacles of control coming out from them. So the more into the outer layers of the onion you go, the more direct contact you're going to be having in the real life operation and management of resources. So, for example, the Society of the Jesters, it's a bunch of judges, right? So the more judges you have funneled into these organizations up through the Freemasons into that sort of, focus group, the more likely it is that you can have control over their minds because of the fact that these rituals shape the way people perceive the world. And having their perception shaped in that sort of way is a very desirable thing, especially if you're trying to keep all of these families moving in a generally same direction. But
I don't think the Jesters,
conflict.
Speaking of the Jesters, I don't think they get enough blame. They should get more blame. Because, like you said, it is judges. It's judges, police chiefs, folks who are high up in law enforcement, basically.
Right. And this is how you can have a 3-week-long standoff with one of these DuPonts, is because all the Jesters know exactly who these people are and how to utilize that power and who not to touch and who to beat to death. Right. So there's the cattle.
You can be a Freemason with a Jester and not realize they're a Jester, right? Isn't that kind of the deal, right?
That's right. And you don't need to know, right? It's the need to know basis that really demands this kind of attention. Is if there's stuff that's happening that you need to know, you'll know it. If there's stuff that's happening you don't need to know, nobody's going to tell you. The very first thing
that the Jesters don't get any blame is because they're not going to take it because it's fellow brothers. They may not, the Masons may not realize their brother is a Jester until some shit pops off and then they cover for him. But at the end of the day, they got to cover for each other because they're brothers, right? So, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's why the Jesters get away with so much shit, because I really do think I think they're not necessarily involved in, like, outwardly just like criminal shit, but just, nefarious shit. Like, part of their deal is they like to play jokes on society, right? So you have these powerful people playing these jokes on society, right? It seems kind of disturbing.
Right. Well, this goes back to that inflationary term of elitism, right? Because as we've seen, the dominance leads to decadence, the decadence leads to degeneracy, and then that degeneracy leads to destruction. And we're in that destruction phase. Right. I mean, Hunter Biden is the poster
All that
boy.
leads to Hunter Biden filming himself having sex with prostitutes, smoking crack while holding a gun to a prostitute's head. I mean, all that's the ultimate. That's the ultimate course of what you're describing.
Right.
Ultimate end of the course.
But he did what he was told. He did what he was told. So all of this stuff, all the extra out of school projects he was working on, trying to get himself on all these porn pages and everything, was kind of a result of how he was treated as a child. You know?
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, he's born into that system, right?
They turn these people into narcissists from the day they pop out of the womb. You know? They have to have the attention. They have to have the love. They have to look for this over and over again. They have these attachment problems because every single generation isn't raised to produce well-adjusted individuals. It's raised to produce the next holders of power, right? There's only so many hours in a day, and all of these powerful people have to maintain their supremacy. Maintaining that supremacy is what leads to that degeneracy. You know, all of these things can be easily understood, but where it gets tricky is maintaining it, because in maintaining it, they go to even more extreme lengths of cruelty to actually try to enforce the maintenance of that power. You know, they have to make the next generation harder than the generation before them to understand and ensure that these things will continue going in the direction that they want them to go. Again, these are very controlling people. So the American blue bloods, I believe, are a much bigger threat than these 13 bloodlines of the Illuminati, because you have to have the people responding to orders. And those people have to know their place in that system. And they have to act accordingly to that system. So all of these different
I've never read the 13 bloodlines. Is this common? Is that accurate? These are the actual ones.
Well, the 13 bloodlines refers to a lot of the ideas about the black nobility coming out of the Roman Empire into.
We've already talked about a couple of these: the Astors, the DuPonts, the Kennedys. I mean, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds. Those are the obvious ones. The Rockefellers don't get enough credit. You know what I mean? Like they're deep. They're, again, we were talking about them before the show. Like they still live on a kind of like they have a bigger compound than the Kennedys and Kennebunkport. You know what I mean? They got a compound in Westchester County with like a dozen mansions on it. You know what I mean? They're not all next to each other. It's a huge property. Bill Clinton likes to jog there on the weekends. You know, he lives nearby in Chappaquiddick. You know what I mean? Like they don't get enough credit for the control they have in America, I think, still. And again, it's a society family. They're the Rockefellers were an early Dutch family. They dropped the yen at some point.
Right. And the idea of Rockefeller has outpaced and outgrown the actual power that they maintain, you know, because for a long time in American history, everything was attributed to the Rockefellers. And now as they're sort of going back into maybe being an underground influence, they understand the blowing wind. They know exactly
they've
how
kind of always been
going.
an underground influence, though, right? I mean, that was Nelson Rockefeller's shtick, right? He always wanted to be president, but never could be president. So he was always kind of the man behind the scenes trying to influence everything, right? And his younger brother, Lawrence Rockefeller, was even more cloak and dagger like than that, funding all the alien nonsense.
Right. Well, if you look at the CIA investigations in the 70s, right, you had two main people on the investigative committee looking into the CIA. One of them was a Rockefeller. He was the guy who knew exactly where the bodies were buried, and he didn't want that getting out.
He'd been a military intelligence officer assigned to the White House since Korea, since the Korean War. Since like 52 or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. He was always in the White House bidding for power. And, when speaking of, kind of the power these folks wield, I think he's a great example because, suddenly these Satanist cults are trying to murder Gerald Ford. And if they had succeeded, if either one of the Manson girls back in 75, a few weeks apart from one another, had succeeded, yes, they were both Manson girls. Manson knew the other one from his childhood. That's an often overlooked fact that somehow this girl that Manson was friends with when he was a teenager in West Virginia is the other woman that tries to shoot Gerald Ford in 75 in California. But had either one of them succeeded, Nelson Rockefeller would have been president.
Right. Was that Squeaky Fromm?
Squeaky Fromm and I can't remember the other one's name. But the other one was like a 40-year-old woman. She, a 40-year-old housewife, had like 3 kids, but she was friends with Chuck from West Virginia, back in Charleston.
And if you look at that case, it's so interesting.
One more thing, real quick. Speaking of these blue bloods and families, I think the best argument for why Chuck became Chuck was because he was born into it. He's part of the family, right? He seems to be, his father seems to be a Maynard from Pikeville, Kentucky, and the Maynards are still in Parliament over there in the UK today. They're a Wasp family from England.
Yeah,
they were an early society family. They were some of the first frontiersmen west of the Appalachian Mountains. I'm also a Maynard, so that's the reason why I'm familiar with the Maynard heritage there. I'm also a Maynard from Pikeville, Kentucky, so my heritage with Chuck is not that far apart, sadly. But yeah, I think that's why people like, he's born into it, right? Like his father was of this, some of this blue blood heritage, despite being from a place like it's considered a rundown, Appalachian hellhole like Pikeville, Kentucky. You know what I mean? The whole idea that this is like, downtrodden, lower socioeconomic area of the country, right? You don't think of that as a blue blood situation, but these families settled all across America. Like I said, the Maynards were were either Virginia society family that had settled the western, basically the area of Appalachia that recently got hit by Hurricane Helene. They were the first ones across that area to west of it. So very prominent in that regard as far as the establishment of America goes as well.
Right.
And again, still Maynards in Parliament today over in the UK, given just as an example of the family's power.
Well, it's the geography that really shapes these families' influences. And I think that goes back to a lot of their perceptions of these mound sites. Because it wasn't just about finding a place of magic. They had to find a place to put down roots that would eventually add to their own family's power. And I think the dominant belief back then was that these were great men of that society that were buried in these mounds. And having that as your base of operations, look at Cincinnati itself. The idea is that the entire place was laid out around these mound sites in Ohio.
Sure.
So having
identical to Rome, right? It's the city of Seven Hills.
Right. Well,
right.
DC, City of Seven Hills.
Yeah.
Right. What did they call DC before they called it District of Columbia? Rome, Maryland. So all of these ideas were embedded into the land before America was ever declared a nation. So how free are we if that's the case? Right?
Sure.
How free are we if these blue bloods have taken over the mound sites to try and get sympathetic magic out of the great men who were buried there?
Sure. I think a lot of them think that's their ancestors. I think they think the giants are their ancestors. I think Cincinnatus was a giant. So these are the Adena mounds that contain the giant human skeletons at the base. They're roughly built around 500 BC to their oldest point. It says, well, that just so happens to be the time in which Cincinnatus lived in the ancient Roman Republic. So he's always depicted as a giant. I actually think he's, as legend would have it, he was a giant. You know what I mean?
Well, the Philistines are an interesting example of that. If you look back at the pottery that the Philistines had, it was Greek motif pottery, right? They had so many different connections to Northern Europe, but people don't think of the Philistines as being this sort of Northern European type tribe. They associate it with the Middle East, but they had settled there after the Great Bronze Age collapse, where they were at war with Egypt, and Egypt decided to plant them up in the Levant area to get them out of the Egyptian, fields of grain, because, Egypt back then was this massive granary for all the rest of the Mediterranean. So by putting them there, they figured, well, now we don't have to worry about them. They'll block the Hyksos from coming back down into Egypt. Obviously that didn't work out too well for them, but the Egyptians made several big time mistakes when it came to geopolitics. But I think that looking at the Philistines and looking at the giants and looking at that idea, they actually allied, according to some sources, they allied with, the Bible included, they allied with King David after being defeated by him. And they used those people as the mercenary army, where they would cleanse the rest of the ethnicities from the Levant. So, our perceptions of the people who were the giants doesn't really match the way politics actually worked back then. Another good example of that is up in the Golan Heights. My dad visited a mound site, which was called, I forget the name of it, but it was literally talking about the Nephilim king that was buried in the Golan Heights. And it's not protected. It's not looked at as being like anything other than kind of an oddity. But you've got this mound site here over in Israel, up in the Golan Heights area, which is, contested territory right now.
Very geopolitical activities.
Very much so.
Everyone wants to own it. Everyone claims ownership of it.
And the same mound now we see over in America, big coveted land as well. So
sure,
something's going on with these mounds, and I don't think a lot of people are talking about them. We've got several different continents that these group of people, the blue bloods, associate back to, and yet, where's our in? Where's our? Go ahead.
I can tell you somebody who loves mounds, and that's Donald Trump.
Really?
Think about how many golf courses he owns. There's barely a golf course on the East Coast that's not built on a mound. I'm just saying right that. Same with Scotland, and he owns a number in Scotland.
Right.
That's interesting.
Right.
So speaking of protecting mounds and having them on private property, Donald Trump owns a lot of mounds.
Right. And that's one way that they can preserve them in relative secrecy, is by having a golf course. Everybody thinks it's just recreation. It's not. There's a religious angle to golf that goes.
There's been a big fight in Newark, Ohio, over what's called the Newark Earthworks. It's a huge earthworks that can't be replicated by modern science, meaning there's lines that are so accurate and in alignment with the sky. They're like 40 acres long, straight lines that modern day technology can't shoot a laser that straight that far. So somehow the ancients did it, and they did it with a line to the sky. But they've been fighting over this property. There was something called the Mound Builders Country Club on it, and they've been fighting whether or not to preserve these mounds as this country club was shutting down.
Well, to go back to Syria, they've got these Syrian megaliths that defy science that are now being, ISISized,
Sure.
I guess that's what you would call it when they go through there and do their iconoclasm, is they're in it to erase history. And so recently we're seeing a lot more interest in how they exactly built these megaliths in Syria. And I'm looking for the name on that. Do you know the name of it? It's pretty iconic.
What are you talking about? Göbekli Tepe over there in the Turkey?
No, that's in Turkey, but there's a Syrian megaliths that are, stones equal in size to.
Yeah, well, I know they were destroying. ISIS was destroying some sites back during the first Trump administration. Over there in modern day Sanlurfa, which is right there on the Turkey Syria border. A lot of old Christian sites there. That was an important area because that's where the Knights Templar, their whole first crusade was there. For like 30 years, they set up shop in the ancient kingdom of Edessa, right there in modern day Sanlurfa, where these ancient Christian sites are that is destroyed.
Right, and so a lot of people associate.
You're going to name your terrorist organization after some ancient Egyptian goddess. Get out of town. This is way more deep and dark ritual occult shit going on here. Absolutely, and I think a lot of people,
think of these Nephilim people, these Nephilim bloodlines, as being all evil. They're the fallen angels, they're the evil ones. But from firsthand accounts and stuff like this, where they settled in the Appalachian region, those people never hurt anybody. Like, you can talk about 7-8 foot giants that lived recently with 6 fingers and maybe some strange dentition. They never hurt nobody, and they weren't being studied by science either. Nobody was talking about them. They're not sacrificing anybody. They live their lives just like the rest of us. They might have, more of a connection to nature than most people. But for fuck's sake, man, let's try and be honest about this stuff. These family bloodlines have been around for tens of thousands of years, and there's a group who wants to wipe them out. So let's be honest. You're not seeing the full picture when you go off and you say that you're the Nephilim death squad. That's just not the case. A lot of these people don't know where they come from. They may see that they have this connection to nature, and do we want to start the burning times again?
Are they out there murdering Nephilim? Is that what's going on?
Well, you listen to these, hardcore Christians who are out there talking about these Nephilim and how, it's these bloodline families and all the rest of this stuff. It's like, no, dude, you don't know the fucking half of it. Go out there and meet some hillbillies that are 7-8 feet fucking tall. They're the kindest, most gentlest, most connected to nature people you'll ever meet. And they'll never, stop to hurt somebody, but they'll help you out with anything, Like, these are the people who settled in America from these ancient bloodlines, and yet you're calling them evil? Like, what the fuck? Like, we know how the stuff happens.
In the Templars mindset, I believe they would claim that their King Jesus was probably a giant.
Right.
They're from the bloodline of the giants. The bloodline of David, right?
Right. So there's still this sort of ancestral memory. There's this ancestral memory of this war that happened. The Greeks had what they called Cyclopean architecture, right? They called it that because they didn't exactly know where it came from, or they knew exactly where it came from. Maybe they were telling the truth. Maybe they knew that the giants were building this shit. So why would they call it the giants unless they knew something about it? So, we're not given the full picture. And there's a lot of stuff about the Etruscans that, plays out and works out pretty well. That the Etruscans were a bunch of perverts and
Who are the Etruscans? Refresh my memory on who they are.
Okay, so they were the ones occupying Italy before the Romans.
Okay.
And they actually influenced a lot of Roman paganism as well. And so the first Roman kings sort of deposed the Etruscans. Toscana, that comes directly from the Etruscans. So the Tuscany region is, the Etruscan region. And they still have a lot of earthworks from the Etruscans, again, back to the mounds and back to these water sites that are still flowing to this day, still watering fields to this day, and they haven't degraded. So there is a lot of magic in this stuff. But you have to understand these perspectives have changed over time, and these aren't the same people that your book talks about that's written in 272 BC, So let's just relax and be objective about this. If it was all the giants and you want to go out there and kill all the giants, you'd have a little bit more evidence than just these, Rockefellers who say that they come from giants, only none of them gets over 6 feet tall. And obviously their bloodlines aren't exactly as strong as they used to be. We can go back to this model of, dominance leads to decadence, leads to, degeneracy and then destruction.
I mean, you make some strong points, though, in keeping it in the family as far as the genetic memory and the DNA in these bloodlines. Because, I often like to joke after doing some DNA tests and looking through my genealogy, I'm shocked I don't have a 70 IQ and web feet and recessed chin. Yep. That's how inbred I am. So, and these families do keep these families that founded America certainly do keep it within the bloodlines for sure.
Right, and I think there could be a bigger factor when it comes to inbreeding, and that goes into, I guess you would call it these epigenetic factors, right? So ancestral memory is an epigenetic factor. Sure. And if you've got a lot of abuse in that family, you're going to have dumber and dumber people because of it. Because that's the only escape, is by not focusing on it, by, basically destroying your minds and then zoning out. Back to the
doing a lot of crack, fucking a lot of prostitutes with a gun to their head while videotaping.
Think about how many times you see a president go into office looking like he's, you know, in his 40s and coming out of office looking like he's in his late 70s. Power
Obama and George Bush both aged significantly. I think Trump might look younger now than he did then somehow, maybe. I'm not sure how that works out.
Well, it could go back to the bloodlines, you know? I mean, people have been breeding people since as long as they've been breeding animals, right? That's what eugenics is, right? Sure. So all of this stuff used to be mapped out. I was saying about the medieval mindset, right? So in the medieval mindset, you had all these dukes and lords. They were kin to the actual royal family, whether it be a cadet line of the royal family, meaning like a sibling, like a Prince Harry, Prince William situation. Harry's never going to be in charge of the crown unless somehow William and his kids were going to die. You know what I mean? So you have these cadet branches, you know, so then you have all these different people who will never have the same power, but they all seek the same power. That's what I mean by, that's the way I look at it with these families. They're all doing the same stuff still. They're never going to get appointed to that royalty position, but they all want that power. So they're all vying to unseat that power. Right. That's all the Middle Ages or medieval times was about, was one cousin or brother wanted to unseat his cousin or brother from being king. So everybody was going to fight about it. What's the same shit right now? You know what I mean? It's the same shit that goes on today in American politics, right? When a family becomes a tribe, it becomes a military structure.
Sure.
If you don't have those lieutenants around you, you don't have a tribe.
Sure.
Why aren't we tribing up? You don't have to hurt anybody, but you do have to protect yourselves, and you do have to protect that genetic memory from becoming, a pool of shit after they starve you and beat you to death, right? If you look at Russia, for example, everybody today in Russia is basically an alcoholic. Why is that? They've still got all that ancestral memory from some of the worst parts of human history when the Bolsheviks took over and beat the shit out of these people.
Technically speaking, I think 10% of their blood is vodka. Like that's a 10% minimum, just to produce oxygen in the body. You know what I mean? Right.
And you look at the pogroms back then. A lot of it was over the amount of alcohol that the Jewish populations were bringing into Russia. Right. A lot of these pogroms had to do with the decadence and degeneracy that went along with what was being imported into their countries. You look at the vodkas that came from Poland, the vodkas that came from Russia, and the battles between these two, goods has a very, very deep, long history that goes back to the times when alcohol was banned by the church and these other authorities tried to take control over it.
Sure, then they had OD on pierogies at that point instead of vodka. when the alcohol was banned.
Right.
They ended up taking pierogi overdoses.
It shouldn't be overlooked that Russia went directly from a feudal society into a communist one. Right?
Sure.
So Russia never fully achieved that middle part of Enlightenment, hybrid government before going straight into communism. And one of the things that Marx said is that the Russians will never achieve communism because they never had the stage of capitalism. Well, what happened? Pierogies are delicious, by the way. So I think it's interesting that these different forms of government are also related to the families that control them. And if you look at the feudal family structure, it's sort of exactly what we have with the blue bloods, only slightly different. Now they don't sell it as feudalism. They sell it as, management by the expert class. And the expert class is always beholden to the families that got them there. It's like another layer of puppetry.
Like the Bidens. Biden's not of any significant these blue blood. I mean, very distant, old world, old England blue blood kind of heritage, very distant. But the reason why he's been so prominent in America is because he got tied up with the DuPonts and they financed his whole situation. So he's essentially an extension of the DuPonts. They sold, for example, him like a 12,000 square foot mansion in Virginia that the DuPonts owned, and one in Delaware. But the one in Virginia he used to get frequently lost in when he was the vice president. Like they sold it to him at that time, and he's like he didn't even know how to get around his own house. Like he would get lost in and shit. That's how big. I mean, that's how much his mind was going on at the time, and how big the house was.
Right. Well, if you remember the movie Fight Club, do you know where Fight Club was supposed to be taking place? At least at that ending scene there.
Was that Newcastle or something, or somewhere in Delaware?
That was Delaware. That's where all the credit card companies are.
Yeah, so that's where the banks and credit card companies are headquartered. Yeah.
Right. And if you've ever lived in the Delmarva area, you know that if you're buying back to school supplies, you got to go over to Delaware where the taxes, they don't have sales tax, right? So you have to understand that these things shape what industries are headquartered there. And, you know, Joe Biden is the ultimate puppet for the credit card companies. He wants to get everybody in debt. And so when you understand his stance on things like drugs and all the rest of the things that he did back in the 90s to try and increase these sentences, it's because that's a new form of debt slavery, is to get these people in the prison system so that you can extract labor from them. And having that extraction of labor causes the private prison system to then get more investors, get more people looking to invest in that style of slavery.
No, that's a solid point. And that's the DuPonts wield a good amount of power still to this day. If you can walk away from murdering an Olympic gold medalist in your driveway, and you can also diddle your own kid in another state and walk away from that, like you got some power. Your family's doing stuff. Right.
Let's talk about Scranton for a minute. Scranton doesn't get enough attention because everybody thinks Scranton is, that's the place where The Office was filmed. But no, there's a Scranton crime family, right? This is where the Hillary Clinton
The Office television show?
Yeah.
I call that the real trannies of Scranton, PA, but yes, go ahead.
So the whole Scranton industry
there
really
some trannies in that show. Don't fool yourself. It's fucking that's some propaganda shit right there. The way that show's not funny. And it's objectively, in my opinion, not funny. But it was somehow the number one show on. Like I try to watch it. I'm like, I'll go back and watch what was considered the number one show on TV. It's not. It's not number one. It's not funny. It's ridiculously unfunny in my opinion. But please go ahead. Scranton crime family. Apologize for strategy with the real trainees of Scranton, PA.
This is
Pam. She's got trans voice. Just Google search trans voice and then listen to Pam, who's married to James Gunn, a real creepster. Real creepster. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just tell me that ain't trans voice when you hear her talk. That's all I'm saying.
That's interesting. I never heard that theory.
This is hilarious. You're disturbed and sick individual, Pete Anderson. I apologize. No disrespect, but it's not. It's objectively not funny. It's a mound I'll die on. The Office sucks.
It's a mound I'll
They put Michelle Obama's cousin in there. That one fella who he's talented. He's funny. The guy from Hot Tub Time Machine, you know.
Yeah.
He was funny. Yeah.
He went to the same high school. He went to the same high school as her, and there was I found a high school publication that references them being the same Robinson family. I've never seen birth certificates, but let's be honest about the situation. They went to the same South Side high school, the Robinson family. They're talking about being family members in high school publications. Like they're the same family. Like he suddenly came on the scene when the Obamas were in office, right? Craig Robinson's the hottest shit since sliced bread. Again, the man. I'm not saying the man's not funny or doesn't have talent, but he came out of nowhere and was all of a sudden everywhere, including The Office, right? Like that was his launch to stardom. I'm just saying that's a whole propaganda vehicle. This whole Office thing, the Ricky Gervais version. Not to get too distracted. That is funny. I'll give him credit for that. That's a funny one. I like the Ricky.
Well,
Gervais.
Here's the thing. Like we could be looking at the new Tammany Hall, right? So instead of having all of the family members get bought off and paid for in these fields of government, now you've got all these TV shows and you've got all these other positions that are propaganda positions, right? Where now you can have these families go into an office, right?
Right.
The office.
Yeah, they're promoting corporate culture, right?
Right. And this shapes the way people see themselves.
Oh, everyone in every office across America was mimicking the shit they saw in The Office. I didn't work in it, but I guarantee it. You know what I mean? Because that's the shit people mimic the things they see on TV. That's not a shocking revelation. And for another example is the second receptionist in The Office. she's from like a billionaire family that runs the state of Missouri. You know what I mean? Speaking of these elite families, the one that went on to be like Kimmy Schmidt.
Kimmy Schmidt, yeah.
Her father is a billionaire bankers from Missouri. Billionaires. You know, huge bank.
I think she's actually kind
big
of funny,
Missouri banking family.
I don't know if you've ever seen that that one. She used to be on this channel101.com. Have you ever been on there? It was like a monthly contest of who can make the funniest video, right? And then they would, have this big bar night where they would show these videos in Hollywood, and then you would vote on who got the funniest. Well, the funniest show would then go on to have another month being up there as, they'd film more episodes. Well, Kimmy Schmidt got her start, I'm not sure what her real name is, doing this video about a blowjob.
For all intents and purposes, it's Kimmy Schmidt.
Right. She got her start about this blowjob video where she's a woman who clearly knows nothing about how to do a blowjob. And so she's talking about like drying her tongue off. I'm going to make it so dry for you. And then she's like, I'm going to do one of these things where I just like that. It was hilarious. But anyways, like that was her start. And then they picked her up from Channel 101 and put her on The Office. And then she went on to have all these other things.
Yeah. Think about everyone from The Office, like all the main characters were launching other careers. Like here's another example of what I mean by the real trannies of Scranton, PA. The bigger lady, Phyllis, was an actual burlesque dancer at like a drag shows in the 70s, right? There's photographs of it, right? So either this was a woman dressing up as drag at a burlesque show in the 70s in Colorado, or that's a dude. You know what I mean? I'm going to go with the latter. That's a dude.
Well, right, but I think they overplayed their hand. I think they were hoping that enough subconscious subtext would be transferred over to the audience back in the Obama era, that once you've got all that subtext and all that subconscious influence, then you can just go whole hog and use this society bending trends whatever to shape society from there. Well, I don't think it really worked out too well because there's been a huge backlash from everybody.
I did not know that, but yeah, she was a burlesque dancer in Colorado in the 70s in like an all male kind of burlesque show. So I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, and the Indian one I think is a dude, and she dates the boy in the show, and he's a I don't know how this works, female to male. I lose track of these things. They've inverted their relationship. You look at that little Indian fella, Mindy Kaling. Like there's right. They actually have a system over there in the Hindu stuff where they identify with certain gods, and they have trans gods. So like that's actually something in their society, which is, I assume she was probably raised like that, right? But then her boyfriend in the show, that little fella, the fella that's tinier than her, you know what I mean? People are like, "What do you mean that's a dude? Are you kidding me? That 5'1" little fella that weighs 100 pounds, that's a dude? Okay, you know what I mean? Like that's ridiculous. That's clearly a female to male situation, right? They're a couple in real life. It's not just on the show. Like that's what I'm saying. That whole thing was because she's objectively not funny. They've tried to put her in other programs and they've all failed. She's objectively awful as a comedian or whatever they want to call her. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that goes on with the programming of that show for sure.
I think there's this angle of passing versus not passing. And instead of having,
it had some major pedo stuff. That's a good comment. Sorry about that, Headless. Yeah, I totally forgot about that. That dude went real heavy on some pedo comments on his Swixter account. Like some real disturbing comments.
Oh, James Gunn? Because I know James Gunn went hard on that pedo stuff.
James Gunn did too, but Dwight did. Rainn Wilson from The Office.
Yeah, he was in a movie with Elliot, whatever her name is now, his name, I guess, whatever.
Page.
Elliot Page, where Elliot Page raped him.
Oh.
And it was called Super. And so, she basically, rapes Rainn Wilson, right? They wanted to have that sort of inversion going on there. Yeah, and then later on, she comes out, right. And then she comes out as trans. So it's like, what is going on here? How are they shaping this reality? And you look at how these characters are affected by it. I don't think I've seen Elliot Page ever smile ever since transitioning. I don't think it's a very.
I don't think so either.
Person.
She looks super happy, right?
Right.
And speaking of how the elites use these programmed actors and stuff through these shows that are starring talentless ass clowns like Rainn Wilson, what else has he done? Right, this rape thing you're talking about, probably the highlight of his career outside of Office. You know what I mean?
Right.
He sucks. He's not talented. You know what I mean? They all have a band. Even one of the guys in the band was named. His character was named after his band. The one dude who was kind of like a serial killer in the background in The Office. You know what I mean? So like they're all entertainers.
Oh, yeah,
you know what I mean?
yeah.
They're like they collected a bunch of low rent entertainers, right, and threw them in an office setting. You know what I mean?
Right, but that guy in the background, right? That character, his big thing was being a member of cults, right? He always sort of identified with this sort of 70s kind of, Chucky sort of culture of being in cults, and he would always bring that up. So it's interesting how that made its way into The Office as well. So there's a lot of this
Creed,
corruption.
that's his name, Creed. That's right. Yep.
Creed Bratton. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
like Rainn Wilson was big in the Clinton Foundation's frauds. In fact, he was in Haiti doing some weird shit with kids down there. It seems at the early onset of the Haiti earthquake back in 2010. But he's only able to get to be a figurehead like that because of shows like The Office. That's what I'm saying. Like they're linked into this whole network of they're going to go do this figurehead stuff to collect in Haiti because that's seems to be.
I think we're losing you there, JJ.
Yep, it's because I was saying something about Tranny Town, USA. No, that's a good comment, though. I like that.
Well, here's the thing. If entertainment is the new Tammany Hall, and these are the people who are supposed to be singing and dancing, it makes sense. It makes sense.
Yeah.
This is where you throw your favors. This is where you collect your favors.
Sure.
What better way to keep these actors close to the throne,
And what better way to manipulate them if you've inverted their genders? I'm telling you, I'm not saying everyone on that cast. I'm just saying there's a number of them on that cast. You know what I mean? But again, it launched everybody. Steve Carell was a huge movie star. Jim from The Office was a huge movie star after that. You know what I mean? Even that other talentless ass clown that they have on there that was in the Hangover films, he became big, even though he's terrible. Ed Helms, he's terrible.
He's not really funny, but he gets the work.
Objectively not. These aren't my subjective opinions. Like he's objectively terrible. He's objectively not funny. Like he's like a low rent Jason Sudeikis, and that's saying something because Jason Sudeikis is already a low rent version of himself.
Right. So there is the concept of the court eunuch, right? So the court eunuchs were often close to the throne because of the fact that they knew that these people didn't really have a future. And if they didn't have a future, you could have them totally invested into the crown and the future you're making as the ruler.
No, for sure.
Okay, JJ convinced
totally.
me.
But no, I think we've covered a lot. I think from the angle of Blue Blood and Tammany Hall,
I think I've derailed our conversation enough.
But yeah, the Scranton connection, that's where Joe Biden got his start, is Scranton.
Sure.
And that's where Hillary Clinton got her start. That's where all of these law firms really took their hold in American politics.
No, I mean, it's not just places like New York City. It's not just places like Boston. It is Appalachia. It is Scranton, PA. It is Logan County, West Virginia, where my family hails from, and Clay and Vance and other members of my family tree were responsible for the largest uprising outside of the civil uprising outside of the Civil War, the Battle of Blair Mountain. So, these families, I think that's why you see some stuff like that popping off, because some of these families that are of the same families that run these elite families, despite not living in the major urban areas, they live in, Appalachia, but they disagree, and some shit like Battle of Blair Mountain pops off. You know what I mean? Right.
That's where the term redneck came from, right? Is because they were wearing the red bandanas around their neck to try and hide their identities as they were taking over the. Because I think a lot of people do that. Yeah, he did. He put the weird skin mask over his face. They're really connected.
I don't like it. I don't like it objectively, in my opinion, but I like it.
Is there any other families or any bloodlines you wanted to touch on?
Oh, Kings Mountain, North Carolina.
Oh, I don't know.
Well, we were going to talk about Asheville.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right there. That's
Asheville,
right next to Kings Mountain.
Right. So Asheville is the Vanderbilt family, and this is where we get news anchors like that white-haired fuck. What's his name?
Anderson Cooper.
Anderson Cooper. Yeah, the Vanderbilt. And if you look back at Gloria Vanderbilt's early pictures, you see a lot of occult imagery. I wouldn't be surprised if Anderson Cooper is one of these MK Ultra wind-up guys. I mean, he seems to be. I was going to say the same thing about his mother.
I wouldn't be surprised if she was tossed around as some folks at an early age.
Yo, when I went out to Yale and I was checking out all the secret societies, there was a place called the Manuscript Society. It really, I don't know, secret society in a sense. It looked like a small little library. And only members could go in there. And Anderson Cooper is a member of that place. So automatically, I would assume he's into occultism. Because, like, you look, I was going to Beinecke Library looking at manuscripts and grimoires. I mean, the manuscript is basically just a handwritten grimoire that wasn't mass-produced. You know what I'm saying? Like,
well, there's definitely a lot of occultism rooted in their mansion down there at the Biltmore, because not only was it specifically located outside of Asheville, it's seemingly in a very specific geographical spot. They use the Olmsted brothers as their landscape architects, and they're notorious for doing all of these occult kind of landscape architecture for everything, including the Society of Cincinnati headquarters, and a lot of other society family properties, all the way up to Brookline, where I was saying with the Welds up there. They also have a whole Olmsted designed landscape architecture. So this is all seemingly very occult stuff. The Olmsted Brothers designs and whatnot. So it seemed to be like the go-to guys for that work. And that's who they have down there at the, I believe it's one of the Olmsteds, if not multiple Olmsteds involved with the Biltmore.
Right. So that goes into the geoglyph angle, right? So they're making these properties into massive geoglyphs to sort of maintain the flow of energy into that family tree. Right. I say it all the time, but land is the lens from which we view God. So as you're looking up, that's coming down too. And these people who have been engaged in surveying the country since before the Revolutionary War understood that to a massive degree. They were looking at the geometry. It's geometry. It has to do with the shapes in the land. And having the ability to have this self-sustaining energy conduit, or this magic battery.
Channel 1. Oh, go ahead. I apologize. I was just thinking out loud. I saw a comment.
Right.
Channel 1, the Vanderbilts. That was a huge psyop on children.
I remember that right in first period at school. Like,
forced to watch it every day. Yeah, every
that
day.
was how they
in classrooms. Lisa Ling was on there.
They were programming
a lot of characters that went on to do some weird geopolitical stuff, because she was involved with North Korea. Her sister was held captive there. Bill Clinton had to go save them, apparently.
But that was the programming to get everybody involved in thinking about getting their news from these 24-hour news stations, because Channel 101 was sort of that introduction. Hey guys, this is the trusted authority. Everything in school is managed in such a way to get you to understand where the managed authority is. They don't have to say it directly, but everybody involved knows where you wait in line, knows when to move, knows when to listen to these bells, and the factory system of education has taken over. And we wonder why it keeps going down. It's because everybody has the ancestral memories of exactly what this thing was meant for. And if you want to see how to decline a society, you attack education first.
Sure. No, I mean, the Department of Education has made America real dumb.
Oh, yeah. I mean, IQ scores and test scores have gone down at a pretty steady rate since the implementation of the
Folks
Department of
can't
Education.
do real math at all, like very simple math. You know what I mean? I see folks at like cash registers at various retail and gas station establishments get real confused, when you start asking them to do math.
Right. And we haven't been taught the right way to do math. I mean, the Greeks had a way of doing math that would count up to the thousands just using the fingertips and the different joints in the finger and understanding where to put what. But instead, we don't get the heuristics anymore. We get this confusing, what do they call it? No child left behind math, right?
Yeah.
Which is the
But, when I went to quite a lot of tard balls in my class, and they all got math. Folks today don't get math. That's what I'm saying. Like, they don't get math at all. You know what I mean? I don't know what's going on. I don't know if it's the tard ball activities or lack of education or a combination of both, but like something really has fallen off with mathematical skills, especially in public education.
I go back to paideia, right? So paideia was the form of education that they used in ancient Greece. And paideia taught you to take joy in education. So they would put everything into a rhyme. They would put everything into a heuristic. They would put everything into a way that it could easily be remembered. And mnemonics, right? What happened to mnemonics? Do we even have that anymore? Do we teach the children how to remember? Memory is like a magical thing. You can recall things from the past at an accurate level and use that high degree of accuracy to make something new. That's incredibly magical. It's drawing on the deepest parts of your subconscious mind to be able to do all these things. And yet all of the useful stuff that went along with paideia have been eliminated. And now we have to do everything the hard way. Rote memorization is the hardest way to learn. They've done the studies, they've seen it. And so all you have to do is just keep going along and keep punching the buttons. And they think that's going to actually produce well-educated people when it produces the opposite. Everybody gets frustrated with their education. They don't take joy in themselves. They don't take joy in the process. The whole thing seems like drudgery. And it's not the way it's supposed to be. There should be an element of joy and emotional fulfillment in education, which is something that is severely lacking on every level because the teachers who are now teaching it never had the joy. It's just a job to them. Tapping into that joy is not something they're encouraged to do.
I don't disagree with you. It makes a lot of sense what you're saying. There is no joy in education, especially in public schools. But there's something else going on when it's when they're trying to teach fifth graders how to put on condoms, but no fifth grader is proficient in math. So there's a deeper problem there. But yeah, there is a lack of joy in the process.
Well, that's an expression of values.
There's also an overabundance of nut jobs, total Looney Tune nut jobs, like to classify them as. Teaching, for whatever reason, that is just what has occurred within the teaching segment from elementary schools. I have two brothers, total lefty Looney Tune nut jobs, college professors. You know what I mean? It's just the culture that has been promulgated throughout education at every level.
Right, and changing the culture is the result of all of these blue blood families creating nonprofit organizations that write the doctrine.
Sure.
That's who does it. That's who's writing the doctrine, is the blue blood families. This is their form of warfare against people who could be taking their positions.
Where do you think tampons in men's bathrooms started? Dartmouth and Brown University, Ivy League colleges. First two places to put tampons in men's bathrooms.
They didn't have to worry about losing their wealth.
Usually people like Ivy League, they're pretty intelligent. That doesn't sound very intelligent to me. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, the idea is those people are going to be the trainers and the promulgators to the next generation of people. Because these were the
next folks running society, right?
These were the elite institutions.
The next leaders of foundations. They're all leading foundations. Every one of these Ivy League assholes, they're all involved in some foundation. It's all part of some scam network of foundations. It's all a bunch of bullshit. But yeah, that is what they do. They run society largely through these foundations now.
And I think the way it works is that they know that there's a natural disconnect of values when it comes to what people say versus what they do. So you'll see that a lot of these blue bloods will talk about all of these horrible racial conditions. But when it comes to allowing people of a certain ethnicity to move into their neighborhoods, the answer is no. no, you can't come here. This is our neighborhood. You go to the next class down from us, because that is how we maintain our power. And that next class down from us, those are the people oppressing you, not us. We're the ones on your side. It's an attack from the top and from the bottom.
Sure. That happened when they shipped all them undocumented illegal alien folks that crossed to or wherever they came from. They swam over here, they parachuted down, who the fuck knows. They walked across the border. They shipped them to Martha's Vineyard, and Martha's Vineyard was like, whoa, we're at capacity.
Call it the National Guard, we're at capacity.
Yeah, we're at capacity.
We're not going to have our land values be devalued by all of these people coming in now.
Oh, exactly.
All the people
I'm living in Little Port-au-Prince, Ohio right now, just outside of it, and I'll tell you right now, it's a problem. You know what I mean? It's a problem. When you put this many people in a small area, it's an issue. I mean, I saw it in Burlington, Vermont a couple of years ago. It also happened to be a Haitian problem there. I have nothing specifically against Haitians. However, these two Haitian fellas were doing some sort of voodoo sacrifice of a chicken inside the hotel hallway, and I was like, "Oh, hey, what's up, fellas? Oh, chickens, huh? All right, well, I'm out of here." I saw what was going on. I didn't stick around to engage any further. But that's not really condoned in American society. That wouldn't be acceptable if two American fellas were doing that in the hallway. But for whatever reason, since they're Haitians, they're allowed to do it. You know what I mean? And Burlington got real stabby about life since the Haitian influx of, again, nothing against Haitians, just looking at the numbers, real stabby, where it didn't used to be that way. Folks didn't used to lock their doors in that town. I'm talking about in recent years, still weren't locking doors in that town. And that's despite the fact that Ted Bundy was born there and that Israel Keys guy struck that town as a serial killer. So it's got a serial killer environment going on in there, but they still didn't lock their doors not until the Haitians came. I'm just saying.
Well, if we look back at the history of Vermont and places like California, we see the biggest Republican, rich, blue bloods were living there for the longest time until somehow there was a switch. And the blue bloods decided that they were going to go Democrat. And so as they went, so with the rest of these places. It seems like Democrat as a party means this is how we engage in class warfare. Right? So the Democrats are always engaged in this attack from the top down. You have to take out. It is very much the blue bloods went Democrat. That's very much what it was. Because Vermont for many years was very libertarian because the Democratic Party remained very libertarian focused, even in the Northeast there, in the blue blood heavy Northeast, right? So yeah. I remember watching movies from the 1950s. I remember
I have a worse temper in sports than McEnroe. So let's assure you, if I don't win, it's gonna get ugly. Throwing rackets, I'm kicking shit. You know what I mean? And that what McEnroe used to do. Then he used to scream at he took a game of tennis where no one even talks. He's screaming at the ref.
You gotta be kidding me!
Yeah,
that was his big line.
I do have to say, I just want to say real quick, for the people who are like strictly audio, you really do miss out a lot if you don't watch the videos. So I highly suggest to check out the videos sometimes, especially the lives.
I remember watching movies from the 1950s when they were talking about how all these Republicans lived in Vermont, and there were other ones where they were talking about the Republicanism in California.
Sure.
And you look at it today, and it seems like it's from a different planet. What do these people think? Think about Reagan, for example. And what did Reagan do? He pardoned Patty Hearst, right?
Well,
and I want to get into that Patty Hearst.
Part of the cult scene. You can't convince me that Reagan was not part of the cult scene. From starring in things like Mondo Hollywood, along with folks like Bobby Beausoleil, Kenneth
he was another actor.
Toy, Charles Manson's lieutenant, you know what I mean? Yeah, he was definitely an actor. You don't mean to tell me they don't have some dirt on him, too? He's running around these same sex cult circles in Hollywood. There's no way he's not involved in the same activities. You know what I mean?
Right. But they put on the different suits based off of what suits them best. And what they think about is how to keep other people out of the club. They don't want to share. That's the point. And so people like, Ronald Reagan pardoning Patty Hearst, a known terrorist, right, would definitely fall into the category of Uniparty activity because Hearst Publishing still had a huge amount Well, they still have a great amount of control and power today, but back then it was very, very understood.
Tanner's son-in-law has been a major figure in Hollywood for years. That dude from MTV for years. Can't think of his name right now. Chris Hardwick. He's married to Patty Hearst's daughter.
He's an interesting character.
The head of the empire. I believe his wife is the head of the Hearst Empire.
Right.
The earthy tones.
We all have like a wow. Didn't do that on purpose.
We do kind of match, right? It is kind of a theme. It's a theme, at least, right? Yeah. The earthy tone theme.
Oh, it was better. It was better when I had the black hat on. It would have matched you even more, JJ.
Yeah.
Do you want to go into Patty Hearst a little bit?
As a bit, like, you know what I mean? So that way, anytime anyone watches a podcast, I'm like, when was that? Like, I don't know. He's wearing the same thing.
Good answer.
I'm bored.
Yeah.
What can I say? What can I say? It's a bit that it gives me some chuckles.
Who'd you say, Headless? Patty?
Well, I was going to ask JJ, do you want to go into the story of Patty Hearst just in case people haven't heard of it before? Because that's a fascinating story.
I don't know how much. I don't know how deep we want to go here, but to give you a quick synopsis. She definitely got involved with a CIA outfit that was doubling as the Sudanese Liberation Army, which Donald DeFreeze was inserted as the second leader of that outfit when the first one wasn't quite militant enough. They couldn't quite get him to do enough militant shit, so they're like, you know what? You're out of here, pal. Donald DeFreeze, who they basically was not even a member of the scene at all. He was just a complete front man, that they put in there. She got linked up with them. So did the Manson girls, though. The Manson girls were sleeping with we're having sexual intercourse activities with the Sudanese Liberation Army fellas. So it's very much the same activity. Patty Hearst is in that same mix, right? Of the same age as these girls there in the 70s, and not that far different. And right. She turned against them right after she got allegedly held hostage. They robbed some banks. Supposedly there was a big shootout in Los Angeles. She allegedly testified. Well, I think DeFreeze dies apparently in that. As the story goes, hard to tell with a clearly intelligence agent like DeFreeze, but yeah, I mean, very spooky situation for sure. And again, the Hearst family, quite possibly more wealthier than the Getty family. I've been to their San Simeon compound out there on the Pacific Coast Highway in California, and opulent is not the proper word. There's not a word for it really. That's how,
right. Well, they go back to the Maine. The bombing of the Maine, they remember the Maine. So that's where they really got, the term yellow journalism kicked off, as the Hearst family was big into publishing. And they were the ones putting out the propaganda for the United States war machine way back before World War I. And so the idea that this Hearst family isn't this connected thing, even by the time Patty Hearst rolls around and joins this communist cutout, is kind of an interesting thing. What exactly is going on in these families that would cause, this stuff? Well, the reason why the Sudanese Liberation Army kidnapped her is because of her relationship to the Hearst publishing empire, and what you see there is that she willingly went along with a lot of this stuff. And when the time came for, the big anti-communist Ronald Reagan to do what needed to be done, he goes out there and gives her a pardon.
Well, yeah, because so I think you have speaking to these elites and they're these blue blood impacts of society and whatnot. Reagan's a good example because I think you have a dispute between the Reagan faction of Republicans and the Bush faction that obviously continues on to the point where he gets shot years later. But that does it is exhibited there throughout the 70s in situations like this. At times when they work together, then later don't work together because Reagan did not like Bush whatsoever. And the reason why I picked him as a VP was to avoid them unseating Reagan at the Republican convention, which they plan to do. So if he picked him as his VP, they couldn't, unseat him as the president, through the electoral process because he just negated that. So
it was
but Reagan was very much in the cult scene. So during the 70s, like he, speaking of another time he worked with the Bush faction, would be he blocked one of Jim Garrison's subpoenas or extradition orders for a warrant out of Louisiana relative to the JFK situation there. So he was trying to he had indicted a guy out of California, but Reagan wouldn't extradite him. Part of that Clay Shaw trial. So
right.
Right.
So the feud between these families ends up being a matter of degrees, not a matter of principles. Because if they really had principles, they wouldn't be engaging in this stuff. But what they think is that if you take things too far, you're not going to get the results you want in terms of maintaining your power. So, for instance, a lot of these 1970s groups that turned out to be, mass murdering terrorists, they were being funded by big banks. And the banks wanted to have society moving in the direction of communism to sort of solidify their power. And what you find later on after the banking collapse in 2008 is that there are no more new banks. It's just smaller ones shutting down. So all of the things are being consolidated into fewer and fewer hands as we get more and more leftist in society. So this formula, right? It's just a slower scale Bolshevik revolution where instead of having a guy as obvious as not Irwin Schiff, but the Schiff family financing all of the railroads for the Soviet Union, now instead you've got a bunch of different families moving in that direction instead of having the one robber baron that's basically the Duke of Russia and the financing arm of Russia. So instead of having a mass revolution, they have a revolution by omission. We omit certain people from the markets, and you can't come into these markets because if you had the capital to get in, you'd already be in them. So you can't start a new bank because you're never going to raise the capital to pass all of the new regulations that they use.
And then you're not going to get approved by the FDIC. You're not going to get approved by the Federal Reserve. They're not going to let you operate in their system. The same way they box out all the marijuana industry with banking. The same way they box out a lot of shit with banking.
Right. And it all ties directly back into what families are controlling these cartel industries.
Sure.
Well, what do you think, boys? Was this what everybody was looking for? Because I think this is the primer. Once you understand how these systems work and some of the names, you can start to do the research yourself and figure out which blue bloods are owning your area, your tax farm.
I think it was a good conversation. I'm gonna definitely consider some new things. I appreciate your insight on a number of these topics, Headless. I'm also gonna go leave some negative 1-star reviews for the television program The Office because it's subjectively, in my opinion, awful.
Every episode, 1 star.
Funny with that.
1 star, terrible, absolutely awful.
He's stuck on that. No funny. All right, yeah. Then I guess we can wrap it up here. That was great. Thank you both. That was a lot of stuff I don't know anything about, so that was great for me. The chat was off and popping. Seems pretty interesting. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, there was a lot of funny stuff in there. A lot of good stuff.
I was trying to keep up.
For the people who watch the video, again, I would just suggest to keep an eye on the comments that I put up too. So entertaining or informational, you never know. You never know what you might get. There was a bunch of people too that I saw from the other channels too. That's what's up. Thanks for jumping in. JJ, you want to plug yourself again real quick?
JJ Vance, host of Operation GCD. Big fan of mounds, secret societies, namely the Society of Cincinnati, and other parapolitical and occult style activities on the Operation GCD podcast, where you'll not hear anything spoke about The Office, unless, of course, I do a future episode called The Real Trannies of Scranton, PA, where I discuss the propaganda machine that was The Office. So I do take that back. You might hear something about The Office. Appreciate the conversation. Thanks for the invite, as always.
Hell yeah. Thank you for coming on.
Absolutely.
And Headless, again.
Wednesday night, Operation GCD Live with Ryder Lee talking ancient alien cargo cults.
Hell yeah. I'll be there too. Should be interesting.
Yes, that's right.
Yes. And Headless.
Hell yeah. Headless Giant, you can find me on Instagram. You can find me on X. I'm streaming this one out, so if you could show some love over on my YouTube channel, that'd be great. We could get that one boosted up so that we can get better, bigger and better guests and have a lot more people coming in. So that'll be fun. So check me out, Headless Giant on Twitter and YouTube.
Sorry.
Yeah, you guys should go.
Headless. I was listening to that.
You guys
Taylor Swift is a dude.
Yeah, all the people that are watching and stuff that are sub to mine. I mean, you should go check out their other channels. I mean, they do cover a lot of stuff that they haven't covered on their show.
I didn't know you had a YouTube channel. To be honest with you, I think I've only seen your X streams.
Right. Well, they stopped doing that once they made it exclusive to checkmark people. I'm thinking about it.
Oh, I got you.
All right. Well, then,
subscribe to your channel then.
And for everybody else, this is the Occult Rejects. All major podcasts, BitChute, Rumble, and YouTube. Again, thank you everybody for checking out the live. That is what's up. That's why I go live. If you're going to be around this Friday at 8 o'clock, there's going to be a whole bunch of us on here. I think like 7 or 8 of us. And it's going to be snake and scorpion symbolism with the guest of Mario from Symbolic Studies. And we should have like 5 or 6 other rejects. It's going to be should be really interesting, and I have a lot of different takes to look at the symbolism. So keep an eye out for that. All right, that's the end of another Occult Rejects. Until the next one, everybody be well. Later.